Good morning, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to episode 6 of the Daily Grind, which is called Finishing the Flaw. And so, what we're going to be discussing today is one of the biggest flaws in our thinking that we see pretty much across the board, and it's become so commonly accepted that we're not even recognizing that it is a flaw anymore. And we'll get into that momentarily. For those who don't know, this podcast series, The Burden of Proof, is based on a book series, which you can find at burdenofproof.co. That'll take you to the shop page where the first book and second book are both available. The first book is available for free right now, so you can go ahead and download that, test it out, see if it's for you. Some people learn in a more practical application sense. They want the facts just for what they are. Other people learn better in a narratorial sense, meaning they need to hear the story. The story allows them to draw details out because maybe they're a visual learner in ways that just a concrete thought explanation may never fully do for them. So it's just another way to work on or to study out, learn the same concepts that we're going to be going over here on this podcast. Plus, it can be an enjoyable read. The characters are relatable, and sometimes it could allow you to potentially work out things in your life that you'd kind of set aside or not fully processed. It did for me. So I would encourage you to go and download book one, because what have you got to lose? But the most valuable resource that you have is your time. So I would say invest a little, test it, see if it's worth the read, see if it will bring fruit to your life. None of these books are very long. Most of them can be read in an hour. And in fact, if you stick with me on this podcast, I'm going to be reading the second half of the first book, The Flaw, right here today. And if you're just looking to, most of us listen to podcasts or to something on the way and to and from work. So if you're just looking to listen to the book, and you're wanting to test it out for free, well, here's your opportunity. Yesterday's episode 5, you can look that up on YouTube you just type in burdenofproof.live, or on YouTube itself, you type in at Burden of Proof Publishing and look up episode 5. That's the first half of the book with commentary. And here in episode 6, we'll have the second half of the book. Now, on into the concept that I was talking about, the one that seems to be across the board. Each one makes this claim sound a little bit different. So, from a scientist, it's very, very clear. They're going to say, we don't really know. You have to examine the evidence. There must be a reason, but without knowing what the evidence actually is for certain, we just can see where it points, and therefore this is the conclusion that we should make. It sounds very rational, but we can't just accept the surface level definition of things and expect to find truth. From a Christian perspective, and I've heard this a whole bunch of times, saying a very similar type thing. Well, there's the one argument: you can't know, you just have to have faith, right? So, but a more detailed, a more articulated argument is one like, you never know anything absolutely. But where does the evidence point? Which is more likely, that that something came from nothing, or that something came from something? that existence came from non-existence or that existence came from existence. What does this evidence point toward? And it's not just true for these. Across the board, this seems to be the common understanding, is that there's no way to know anything absolutely. But see, that claim is self-refuting. It's self-contradictory. And we have failed, myself included, to recognize it at all. We may semi-recognize it when it comes to a belief that doesn't line up with the ones we already hold. And we might point out, well, that doesn't have any real evidence. But you see the key word there, real evidence. What would quantify as real evidence? We're adding a condition there with the word real that undermines the actual definition of what is real in the first place. So when we say what is real evidence, well, it's evidence that's true. And how do you know it's true? Well, you have to know it absolutely. And so the underlying flaw is that in all of these cases, what they're saying is you cannot know with 100% certainty what is true. What that means is you cannot know with 100% certainty what is evidence, which means that you're just treating evidence as if it's subjective. So in reality, it cuts off its own legs. It literally has absolutely nothing to stand on. By saying that you can't 100% know anything, you have just said you can't know what evidence is. And therefore, whatever you think you're leaning to, it's completely subjective. It has no concrete definition or truth in reality. And yeah, maybe if you proved the truth exists, maybe you'd be lucky enough that you somehow managed to line up with it based on hypotheticals that you thought were evidence. But what makes your hypotheticals any better than their hypotheticals? It would seem to me in that particular position where you're saying nothing is actually knowable, that the only rational position would be skepticism. But is skepticism actually a rational position either? And see, this is the underlying problem with that claim. And we're going to get into exactly how and why this could be potentially resolved as we explore the method step by step. So I'm going to make a claim today that there is a method that exists that could actually potentially reveal something definitively true. And what I want you to do is I want you to test it. Not today, because it's not coming today. Today is finishing the flaw. It's exposing this massive flaw that we've overlooked in the fact that anyone who says you should just examine what the evidence point to and says that you can't actually truly know anything, can't truly know, and in fact cannot know at all, that evidence is evidence in the first place. So the thought is self-undermining, the claim is self-defeating. So how do we learn to make a claim that's actually valid, if something is actually real or true, how would we test it to find out? And how would we know that that test actually works? Like I said, we're going to get all into all of that in future episodes. We'll really get started on it on Sunday. But for now, let's roll on through and do a little bit of reading, as I said, from book 2 of the Flaw. And book 1 of the Flaw, chapter 6 is where we left off yesterday. So that's where we're going to start. And as we go through it, I may give a little commentary, but I'm going to try to read it pretty fluently through here. Chapter 6, The Myth of Facts. The next morning, Marcus found himself arguing with a YouTube video. Not out loud, just in his head. The video was about science, specifically how science has proven various things. The host kept using the phrase, "it's a fact," to shut down alternative viewpoints, and something about it bothered Marcus. He paused the video. It's a fact. How many times had he heard that phrase? How many times had he said it? It's a fact that I can't stop at one drink. It's a fact that I'm not good enough. It's a fact that everything I touch falls apart. But were those things facts? Or were they beliefs he repeated so many times that they felt like facts? Marcus opened a new tab and searched, "What is a fact?" The results were surprising. Most articles said the same thing. A fact is something confirmed by observation and repetition, something that can be tested and verified, the most reliable explanation we have given the evidence available. But, and this is crucial, facts are always provisional. They hold until better evidence comes along. Marcus read that line twice. Provisional. That meant facts could change. Not because truth changed, but because our understanding of truth could improve. He thought about things that used to be facts. Bloodletting cures diseases, cigarettes aren't harmful, or that a tongue has taste zones for each flavor. People had been certain about all of those things, absolutely, unquestionably certain. And they'd been wrong, at least about some of them. Or how would they actually even know? So, that was my own commentary, those last couple lines I stuck in there. But not because they were stupid, but because they treated provisional conclusions as absolute facts. Marcus leaned back. I've been doing that. It's a fact that I'm an alcoholic. Was it? Or was it the most reliable explanation given the evidence, but still open to revision? He paused. That felt dangerous, like he was looking for an excuse to drink. But that wasn't what he meant. He was an alcoholic. The evidence supported that. His behavior, his choices, the consequences, all of it pointed to the same conclusion. But calling it an absolute, unchangeable fact made it feel like a life sentence. Like he couldn't ever be anything else. What if it was more accurate to say, given the evidence, it's most likely true that I have a problem with alcohol. And until better evidence suggests otherwise, I need to act as if that's true. Sorry, my Facebook was cutting out for just a second there. So I'm going to reread that last part. What if it was more accurate to say, given the evidence, it's most likely true that I have a problem with alcohol, and until better evidence suggests otherwise, I need to act as if that fact is true. That felt different, less like a cage, more like a working standard. Marcus kept reading. The article he found next broke down how people misuse the word fact. It's a fact that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, is it? That claim came from marketing campaigns, not rigorous science. Recent studies show mixed results. What people mean is, I've heard this repeated so many times it feels true, but repetition doesn't make something a fact. Marcus snorted. He believed that one too. In fact, it's a fact that God exists. It's a fact that God doesn't exist. Both are metaphysical claims, positions held with varying degrees of confidence based on evidence and reasoning. Neither can be confirmed through observation and repetition in the same way scientific facts can. Both sides would be more honest saying, I believe the evidence points towards this conclusion. But calling it a fact sidesteps the actual epistemological question. Marcus stopped. Epistemological. He'd had to look that word up yesterday. It meant related to knowledge, and how we know what we know. And this article was right. People used fact to mean thing I'm certain about, but certainty wasn't the same as truth. Marcus thought about his dad's funeral, about the people who'd said, he's in a better place now. They'd say it like a fact, certain, unquestionable, but was it? How did they know? What evidence supported it? Marcus didn't know if his dad was in a better place. He wanted to believe it, but wanting something didn't make it true. And pretending to be certain about it when he wasn't, calling it a fact to avoid discomfort of not knowing, that was dishonest. A fact is something confirmed by observation and repetition, the most reliable explanation given the evidence. Everything else is belief, interpretation, or opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as we're honest about what we're claiming. Marcus closed his laptop. He thought about the house, about the leaks he'd ignored. He told himself that it was fine. The leak wasn't a big deal. The water spot would dry up on its own. He treated his wishful thinking like a fact, and the ceiling had caved in. I can't afford to do that anymore. Not with the house, not with his sobriety, not with his beliefs. If he was going to rebuild, he had to be honest about what he knew and what he didn't. Facts were provisional. Beliefs were working standards, and certainty, real certainty, was rarer than people wanted to admit. Marcus stood up and looked at the hole in the ceiling. I don't know how to fix this, but I know I can't keep pretending it's not broken. That felt like progress. So before we read the next chapter, I just want to point out here that Marcus is failing to understand the same thing that I didn't recognize here, which is to assume that evidence can be treated as evidence if it hasn't been proven to be evidence. So he basically follows and believes these definitions or these things that other people have set forth. And it's not, like I said, it's not just science. We've all kind of set this forth, this idea. Let me not say we've all, but most of us have either believed or set forth the idea that we don't actually know, or at least that there isn't a way to 100% know what is true. All we can do is examine the evidence and see where it points. But if we haven't proven that anything exists, if we haven't proven that truth exists, we surely haven't proven that evidence exists and what would qualify as evidence, and therefore it's just what we think should be evidence. And that is completely subjective. It has no value as actual evidence until it is proven to be so. And as it says here, that's rare. What was it? That's rarer than people wanted to admit. And now looking at it, I wrote this, I don't know, a couple months ago, 3 months ago now, and I thought it was rare then. Looking at it now, I'm not sure I can hardly find a situation where certainty, actual certainty, even if it has been proven internally, I'm not sure where I've seen it shown, because it would require proving something, at least one thing is self-evident. So it's evidence that it itself is true and real, because you would need that in order to build the foundation for what is true as a whole. And if you can't do that, then you haven't actually proven anything. And so we're going to get into if that's even possible, if there is a method that exists to find truth. And I'm proposing that there is a method that exists. But it's up to you to test it and find out if it's true. So we'll keep going with chapter 7. When did it start? Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his laptop when he realized something. Every thoughtful person remembers the moment something didn't add up. For him, it had been the leak. Not the physical leak, though that had been real enough, but the moment when his inherited belief system collided with reality and he couldn't unsee it. It happened slowly, and then all at once. He thought back to the first time he'd noticed something was wrong, not with the house, with himself. It was 3 years ago. He'd been at a party, drink in hand, laughing at something that wasn't funny, and for just a second, he'd stepped outside of himself and thought, why am I here? What am I doing? The thought had lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then someone handed him another drink and the moment passed. But the question had lodged itself somewhere in the back of his mind. Why am I here? What am I doing? He ignored it, explained it away. I'm just overthinking. I'm stressed. I just need to relax. But the question kept coming back. At parties, alone in his dorm, staring at his reflection in the bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. Why am I here? What am I doing? And then one night, a different question. What if I'm wrong about everything? That was the leak. Not obvious, not dramatic, just a quiet drip that said, something's not right here. Marcus had panicked. He doubled down, drank more, partied harder, convinced himself the doubt was the problem, not the beliefs. The natural response is panic. Defend the belief, attack the contradiction, avoid the discomfort. He'd read that yesterday. It described him perfectly. But panic hadn't worked. The doubt kept growing, the contradictions kept mounting, his grades slipped, his relationships fell apart, and he still kept defending the conclusion. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Until it wasn't. Until he flunked out. Until he showed up at his dad's house with a duffel bag and shaking hands. The better response is curiosity. Sit with the tension, ask questions, resist the urge to resolve it immediately. Marcus hadn't done that. Not then, but he was doing it now. Sitting with the discomfort, asking questions, resisting the urge to patch things over and move on. The best response is investigation. Examine the foundation, test the claims, follow the evidence wherever it leads. Marcus opened his laptop again. He'd been investigating for 3 days now, reading articles, watching videos, following the threads of logic until they led somewhere uncomfortable. And what he'd found wasn't comforting. Most of his beliefs about himself, about the world, about how things worked, weren't based on evidence. They were based on inheritance, emotion, and convenience. He'd believed what was easy to believe, what fit the narrative he wanted, what people around him believed, and he'd never questioned it until the ceiling caved in. Marcus stood and walked to the hallway. The hole was still there, bigger now, because he'd pulled away some of the loose plaster. He stared at it. Leaks don't mean the house must be destroyed. They mean the house must be tested. He'd read that too, and it was true. The house wasn't beyond saving, but ignoring the damage and slapping paint over it wouldn't work. He had to go all the way down, find the source, fix the foundation, and if that meant tearing out walls and floors, that's what it meant. Marcus looked at his hands, still shaking slightly, but steady enough. He wasn't going to the bar. He was going to rebuild. But first he had to understand what he was building on. Chapter 8. The Claims Beneath the Claims. Marcus started making a list. Not a to-do list, a belief list. He opened a blank document and typed, "Things I believe." Then he stared at the cursor. What did he believe? He typed slowly, "I believe I'm an alcoholic." Okay, that one felt solid, but underneath it, what was the claim? He thought for a moment, then typed, "My claim, I cannot control my drinking once I start. Evidence. Every time I've tried to stop at one, I haven't." That was a claim, not a conclusion. A statement about reality that could be tested, and the evidence supported it. Marcus kept going. "I believe I'm a failure." He paused. That one felt true. But was it a belief or a feeling? He tried to break it down. Claim, my academic and personal failures define who I am. Evidence, I flunked out of school, I hurt people, I let my dad down. But was that evidence for the claim, or just evidence that he'd made mistakes? Marcus frowned. Conclusion, I'm a failure. Claim beneath it, past failures determine future outcomes. Evidence? He stopped. What was the evidence that supported that claim? That past failures determine future outcomes. His dad had believed you could turn things around. "You're doing good, son," his dad had said. Marcus had turned things around. For 3 months he'd been sober, going to class, rebuilding. So the claim that past failures determined everything, was that true? Or was it just a belief he'd absorbed because it felt true? Marcus deleted the line. He kept typing. "I believe my dad was proud of me." Claim, my dad's words reflect his true feelings. Evidence, he said, "I'm proud of you." His actions showed support. That one felt solid. "I believe I can't fix this house." Claim, I lack the skills and resources to repair the damage. Evidence, I don't know how to fix roofs or floors. I don't have money for contractors. True, but fixable. He could learn, he could save money, and he could ask for help. The claim was true right now, but it wasn't permanent. Marcus leaned back. A claim is not a conclusion. A conclusion is the destination. A claim is the first solid step. He'd been defending conclusions without ever examining the claims beneath them. I'm a failure. That was a conclusion. But what claim supported it? I failed before, true. But did that mean he'd always fail? No. I can't control my drinking, true, based on evidence, but did that mean he could never be sober? No, he'd been sober for months. Marcus stared at the list. Most of the beliefs weren't wrong, but they were built on claims he'd never questioned. And if the claims were shaky, the conclusions couldn't hold. Stop staring at the furniture upstairs. Walk down into the basement with a flashlight. Marcus highlighted the document and deleted it. Then he started over. This time, he didn't write beliefs. He wrote claims. Claims I need to test. I cannot control my drinking once I start. Past failures mean I'll fail again. I'm not capable of rebuilding my life. The beliefs I inherited from my dad are all true. Sobriety is the only way forward. He stared at the list. Some of those claims felt dangerous to question, especially number 5. But if he was going to rebuild honestly, he couldn't exempt anything. Marcus saved the document. Then he opened a new one and titled it Evidence. Chapter 9, The Evidence Problem. And so, before I start that, I just wanted to point out that once again, this is the same underlying flaw that I was just discussing before we started reading the book. The last 2 chapters have showed the fact that if whatever your claim is standing on hasn't been proven, no matter how far down that goes in the chain, if every step is not proven, then what you are asserting is a claim that doesn't have evidence. And calling something evidence without proving that it's true and actually can work as absolute and correct criteria for determining truth, you cannot just say something is evidence and assume people should just accept it as such. Sure, you could be right, but it's just as likely that the next person could be. And it's not evidence until it's fully supported. And that's what this is talking about here. If the claims underneath don't fully support the conclusion, then the conclusion doesn't follow. In this case, the word follow means to be the result of by necessity, meaning there is no other alternative, and you haven't proven that. So, the evidence problem, chapter 9. Marcus spent the next day gathering evidence, not for all the claims, that would take months, but for one. I cannot control my drinking once I start. He opened a notebook, the physical kind, because writing by hand felt more real, and started listing evidence. Evidence for every time I've tried to stop at one drink, I haven't. I've made promises to stop and broken them. I've experienced withdrawals when I quit. My life fell apart because of drinking. He stared at the list. The evidence was overwhelming. Evidence against. He couldn't think of any. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. He had a problem with alcohol. But then he thought about something he'd read yesterday. You can't just count the evidence that supports your conclusion and ignore the rest. The question isn't, can I find evidence for this? The question is, does the total evidence, including what contradicts me, make this claim more likely true than false? Marcus frowned. Was there evidence against the claim? Or was he just refusing to see it? He thought harder. Evidence against. I've been sober for 3 months until Dad died. I haven't had a drink since the ceiling caved in. Wait. He'd been sober. He was sober, technically, even now. Sitting here with his hands shaking and the bar 3 blocks away, he hadn't drunk. Did that contradict the claim? No, the claim wasn't I will always drink. The claim was I cannot control my drinking once I start. The evidence for that was still solid. But the evidence also showed something else. He could choose not to start. Marcus wrote that down. New claim. I can choose not to drink, but I cannot control my drinking once I start. So, what I want to point out here is another flaw that's being made. He says here, I can choose not to drink, but I cannot control my drinking once I start. He put those together as if they were a singular claim. The problem is sometimes when we do this, we actually end up having two claims, one of them being true and one of them being false. And when you do that, you tend to come to the conclusion that a claim can be both true and false or partially true. And that cannot be the case. And we'll, based on the laws of logic that we have accepted as true in order to function in daily reality. But even those must be tested. Nothing is beyond testing, and if you don't test every step, then once again, anything that you're calling evidence is still really just a subjective point of view. Let's see. So that felt more accurate, and it meant something important. Sobriety wasn't about controlling his drinking. It was about choosing not to start in the first place. Marcus closed the notebook. This is how evidence works. So he got part of the way there from a perspective of conditional validity, which we've discussed in the past. Yesterday, I explained how it's kind of like training wheels, or maybe I didn't actually use the analogy, but I'll use it now. That when we're young, even up into our later years, when we finally reach a point where we realize that our beliefs don't necessarily line up with reality, not just one, but when we have like a collapse moment here, like Marcus just did, and he recognizes that it's not just one belief that doesn't line up, but many of them, then is the time where we start to test or to recognize that there is a need for testing. And if we follow that to its core to find out if anything is actually true, if anything is actually real, if things do exist in the first place, essentially what that means is we're taking off the training wheels. Before that, training wheels are necessary, because if not, we would be frozen. We wouldn't know if we should walk out the door or not walk out the door, choose this or choose that, which decision is right. We would be stuck in place, absolutely frozen, because we wouldn't be able to make a decision at all without taking something and assuming it to be evidence. And when it lines up with reality, if reality exists, then it's true and it actually is evidence, but it hasn't been proven yet. Really, it's just a guess. It's a hypothetical based on continued experience that allows you to develop a pattern of thinking to where you have actually assumed it's true, but not fully proven that it's true. So that was a little bit more than I meant to say. Hopefully it was clear that I'm saying that. Well, let's just clarify one more time. Training wheels are operating without knowing that anything is absolutely true because you haven't tested the entire chain to get there. It is what is required until a point that you know the entire chain needs testing. At that point, it is time to take the training wheels off and to test the chain. If you don't know how, it's time to find the right tools in order to take the training wheels off and fix whatever's wrong with your bike. I hope that analogy helps. If not, ask a question in the comments. I'm more than happy to do my best to answer. One of the things that I'm going to do at the end of this video is discuss how I'm going to be answering in the future. What I will tell you now is that I'm only going to answer within a scope that has been within the scope of the material that I have covered so far. So if you ask a question that comes along much later in the chain of the method, for now that will have to be set aside, because then if I answer that question, I'm doing exactly what I'm saying that we shouldn't be doing once we take our training wheels off, which is to make an assertion without having proven every step. And so I will do my best to answer within the scope of where we are, and my refusal to answer a claim in the moment when it's asked, if it's further down the chain, is because if I was to answer, the answer would be meaningless in the aspect that I haven't proved it yet. I would be making an assertion without evidence that it's actually true. And so that would go against the method that's being proposed to exist. So I'll explain more as we go step by step through, but at the end here I'll tell you about the scheduling, how the process is going to work. I did yesterday, but I want to make sure that was clear as well. So, and it meant something more important. Sobriety wasn't about controlling his drinking. It was about choosing not to start in the first place. Marcus closed the book. This is how evidence works, not finding one piece of proof and calling it settled, but gathering all the evidence, including what contradicted him, and seeing which direction it pointed. And the evidence about his drinking pointed clearly. Don't start. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up an article he'd bookmarked yesterday. It was about cherry picking, the practice of accepting only evidence that supported your conclusion while ignoring evidence that didn't. You could say, I've picked my share of cherries. I think that's true for a lot of us, because our worldview becomes the lens by which we discern reality, how we perceive it, and how we interact with it. Truly examining that lens is a terrifying thought. Marcus had been cherry picking for years. When people said he drank too much, he'd focused on the times he didn't drink. See, I can stop whenever I want. When his grades slipped, he'd blame the professors, the workload, anything except the fact that he was hungover in class. When relationships fell apart, he'd focused on what the other person did wrong, not his own behavior. Cherry picking, accepting only the evidence that fit the conclusion he wanted. And the conclusion he wanted was, I'm fine. Everything is fine. Even as the evidence piled up that he wasn't. Marcus thought about the house. He'd done the same thing there. The leak's not that bad. The water spot will dry. The floor's just a little soft. Cherry picking the evidence that let him avoid dealing with the problem until the ceiling caved in. But we should never cherry pick evidence, accepting only what supports our claim, because eventually, inevitably, our conclusions will smash into reality. And when the deceptions we've allowed ourselves to believe crumble before our eyes, we're the ones left standing in the rubble. Marcus closed his eyes. He'd been standing in the rubble for weeks now. The house, his sobriety, his dad, his beliefs. All of it had crumbled because he cherry-picked the evidence that let him avoid the truth. And how do you avoid cherry-picking? How do you force yourself to be honest with the evidence? He kept reading. That's where the burden of proof comes in. The person making the claim must demonstrate that the claim is more likely true than false. But most people reverse this. They make a claim, then demand you disprove it. Marcus thought about his drinking again. And I want to point out here, once again, How will you prove that your claim is more likely true than false if you haven't proven that your evidence is actually evidence? There's steps that are required for that. And is more likely sufficient? Saying that something is more likely evidence is still saying the same thing. It's more likely evidence based on what evidence? You see the problem? We're just stacking layers of things we still don't know. All right. Marcus thought about his drinking again. He'd made the claim, I don't have a problem, then demanded evidence to the contrary. Show me proof that I'm an alcoholic. Show me that I've hurt anyone. And when people provided the evidence, his grades, his behavior, the DUI, he'd explained it away. That was just one time. That doesn't prove anything. He'd reversed the burden of proof. Instead of proving he didn't have a problem, he'd demand others prove he did. He'd set the bar impossibly high. Marcus opened his notebook again and wrote, burden of proof. I must demonstrate that my claims are more likely true than false, not demand others disprove them. He stared at the words. That changed everything. But if the burden was on him to prove his claims, then he couldn't hide behind, you can't prove I'm wrong. And most of us have been guilty of doing this quite a bit. Hopefully in this moment brings a little recognition to maybe some times that you have done that in the past, in order that maybe you can go back and reassess your conclusions about those things. He had to actually examine the evidence, all of it, and let the conclusion follow from that, not the other way around. Marcus looked at the hole in the ceiling. Evidence is the ground beneath the foundation. If the soil is sand, the house leans. If the soil is rock, the house stands. He'd been building on sand. But he didn't have to keep doing that. Chapter 10, The Laws of Logic, the Physics of Thought. Marcus had been reading for 6 days straight. He'd barely slept, barely eaten, just read, thought, wrote, and read some more. And he kept coming back to one realization. I've been breaking logic without realizing it. Not intentionally, but consistently. He'd been saying things like, I'm fine, but I'm not fine. I can stop drinking, but I can't stop. I believe my dad's beliefs, but I don't. Contradictions everywhere, and he'd never notice. Marcus found an article that broke it down simply. If I told you it's raining and it's not raining at the same time in the same place, you'd know something was wrong, even if you couldn't explain why. That's logic. He read about the 3 basic laws. Law of identity. A thing is what it is. The law of contradiction. A thing cannot be both itself and its opposite at the same time in the same sense. The law of excluded middle. A claim is either true or not true. There is no third option. Simple. Obvious. And yet Marcus had been violating them constantly. I'm an alcoholic, but I'm not really an alcoholic. Both couldn't be true. Either he was or he wasn't. I can't control my drinking. I can control my drinking, but I can't. Contradiction. I'm fine. What was true or false? Was that true? No, when he said I'm fine, was that true or false? There was no middle ground. Marcus leaned back. These laws are not invented, they are discovered. People try to break them all the time. It's my truth, that's true for you, but not for me. Both sides are right, but you cannot break logic any more than you can make a fire burn cold. He thought about the conversations he'd had over the years. How many times had someone said, that's just your truth, when he pointed out a contradiction? How many times had he said that to avoid dealing with, how many times had he said it in order to avoid dealing with uncomfortable facts? But the truth wasn't personal. It wasn't flexible. Either something was true or it wasn't. Marcus stood and walked to the hallway. He looked at the hole in the ceiling. You can call it cold. You can convince yourself it feels cold, but when you reach into the flame, reality decides the result, not your interpretation of it. The ceiling had caved in. That was reality. He could call it not that bad. He could reinterpret it as just a little damage, but the hole was still there. And pretending otherwise didn't change it. You can only ignore logic, and the potential consequences of ignoring it are as real as the burn. Marcus had ignored logic. He told himself contradictory things and never noticed the cracks forming, and now he was standing in the wreckage. But at least now he understood why. Marcus walked back to the couch and sat down. He thought about the last 6 days. He'd learned something crucial. Thinking wasn't just about having options, it was about following rules, logical rules that couldn't be bent or broken without consequences. And he'd been breaking them for years. So even this, what I want to ask here is, has he actually proven that these laws of logic are absolute? Is that even a requirement? It's important to ask the right questions here. Moving forward, we'll address this a little bit more. Like I said, when we get into it next week, we will start by addressing the first one of these laws. So it says, and he'd been breaking them for years. Beneath the soil, beneath the bedrock, beneath everything else, the laws of logic are what makes building possible at all. Without them, no claim can be made, no evidence can be evaluated, and no conclusion can be trusted. Marcus opened his notebook one last time. He wrote, to rebuild, start with logic, the bedrock, add evidence, the soil, make honest claims, the beams, reach conclusions carefully, the structure, in that order, always. He closed the notebook, then he looked around the living room, at the couch where he'd slept for months, at the hole in the ceiling, at the door that led to the bar 3 blocks away. His hands were shaking again, but not as bad as before. But enough. I don't know if I can do this. But he knew one thing. He couldn't keep doing what he had been doing. The house was falling apart. His life was falling apart. His mind was falling apart. And if he walked out that door right now, Marcus stopped. Logic first, evidence second, claims third, conclusion last. What was the evidence? Every time he'd started drinking, he couldn't stop. What was the claim? If he walked to the bar, he'd drink. And if he drank, he wouldn't stop. What was the conclusion? Don't walk to the bar. Marcus sat there for a long moment. His hands were shaking harder now. His vision was blurring slightly. The gnawing pain in his chest hadn't gone away. If anything, it was worse, because now he understood why it was there. Not just his dad's death, but the realization that he'd built his entire life on a foundation of unexamined beliefs. And rebuilding meant sitting with that pain, feeling it, and not numbing it. But I want to. Wanting something didn't make it logical. But I need to. Need based on what evidence? Marcus thought about his dad and about the last thing he'd said. I'm proud of you. Was that true? Had his dad been proud of him? The evidence says yes. His dad's words, his actions, the way he'd never given up on Marcus, even when Marcus had given up on himself. And if his dad had been proud of him, then when Marcus was sober, going to class, rebuilding, what would he think if Marcus walked to the bar right now? Marcus closed his eyes. I can choose not to start. That was the claim, the one he'd written down yesterday. I can choose not to start. He opened his eyes. The door was still there. The bar was still 3 blocks away. The emptiness was still crushing his chest. But he could choose. Marcus stood up slowly. He walked to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and drank it. Then he walked back to the couch and sat down. He wasn't going to the bar. Not today. 2 days later, the house was still broken. Marcus had spent the last 2 days in a fog, not reading, not thinking, just existing. He'd made it through the crisis moment. He hadn't gone to the bar, but the victory felt hollow because the problems hadn't gone away. The ceiling still had a hole in it. The floor in the laundry room was still rotting, and the breakers were still flipping intermittently. And the void in his chest hadn't budged. He'd learned how to think. He understood logic, evidence, claims, conclusions. He knew what he'd been doing wrong, but knowing didn't fix anything. Marcus sat on the couch, staring at nothing. What's the point? He'd examined the foundation. He'd traced his beliefs back to the source. He'd learned that most of what he built his life on was inherited, unexamined, built on sand. Now what was he supposed to do? Rebuild from scratch? Start over with nothing? The thought was exhausting. Marcus looked at his hands, still shaking, always shaking. I can't do this. He stood up, walked to the door, put his hand on the handle. Just one drink. Just to take the edge off. Just to make it bearable. He pulled the door open, stepped outside. The sun was too bright. The air was too cold. Everything felt sharp and wrong, but his feet knew the way. Left. 3 blocks. Marcus started walking. He wasn't thinking anymore. Not about logic, not about evidence, not about the claims or conclusions or any of it. He was just moving. One drink. That was the only thought. The only thing that made sense. One drink. And this will stop. The sharp ache will fade. The shaking would stop. The weight of the last 6 days would lift. Just for a moment. He walked faster, 2 blocks away now. His vision was blurring. He couldn't tell if it was tears or just exhaustion. I don't even care anymore. About the house, about school, about logic or evidence or any of it. I don't care about anything. He just wanted the noise to stop. 1 block away. His hands were shaking so hard he had to shove them in his pockets. I just wanted to stop. 1/2 block. He could see the neon sign ahead, the familiar door, the place where everything made sense for a few hours before it all fell apart again. I just need one drink. And then impact. And so right here is where it takes us back to the point, I believe we left off around chapter 4 or 5. So for those of you who didn't hear the first half or didn't catch on to what was happening in the first half, it cut off at this scene. So basically there was a flash forward that happened from Marcus where he was sitting looking up at the hole in the ceiling, and it skipped the entire portion that we just read, and it showed him walking to the bar, and it reached this moment of impact, and then it flashed back to show what happened in between there. So I just wanted to clarify that for anyone listening yesterday who was a little confused by what was going on in the story or what happened next after the impact went, how the impact related to the story. Now we see everything that happened first before this moment of impact, and it is the same moment of impact given earlier in the book. Collision, chapter 11. Marcus slammed into someone hard enough to knock them both off balance. Coffee splashed. He felt it, hot against his shirt. Why don't you watch where you're going? A woman his age, maybe. Dark hair, coffee-stained jacket, furious. I'm so sorry, Marcus started, his voice cracking. I'm sorry, I've just had a lot on my mind. He couldn't finish that sentence. His throat was too tight. His vision was blurring worse now. She opened her mouth, probably to unleash more anger, and then stopped. Really looked at him. Her expression shifted. Hey, Her voice was softer now. Are you okay? Marcus shook his head. Yeah, He swallowed hard. I just need to get a drink. The words hung in the air. Her eyes flicked down to his hands, the tremor, the white knuckles, the way he wouldn't meet her gaze. She knew. Of course she knew. People who'd been there always knew. You know, she said slowly, gesturing to the building behind her. A coffee shop he'd walked right past, without noticing. I already had a cup of coffee, but I'm feeling a little extra tired today. She paused. I think I'll go back for another. She looked at him, not judging, not pitying, just waiting. Do you want to come with me? Marcus stared at her. Then at the street ahead, the bar was right there, half a block. 30 seconds away, he looked back at her. She was still waiting. Patient. Like she had all the time in the world. I'm Sarah, she said. Marcus. So, Marcus, she tilted her head towards the coffee shop. Coffee? Marcus looked at his hands, still shaking. He shoved them deeper into his pockets. He looked at the bar again, the neon sign, the familiar door, one drink. Then he looked at Sarah. At the coffee shop. Behind her through the window. He could see warm lights. People sitting at tables, normal life happening. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he made a choice that wasn't about running away. Yeah, he said quietly. Coffee sounds good. Sarah smiled, not a big smile, just a small, knowing one. Good, she said, let's go. They walked towards the door together. Marcus didn't know who this woman was. He didn't know why she'd stopped. He didn't know if one cup of coffee would change anything. But he knew this. The bar was still half a block away, and he was walking in the other direction. The door to the coffee shop opened. Warm air, the smell of coffee, the hum of conversation. Sarah held the door. Marcus hesitated. Logic first, evidence second, claims third, conclusions last. The evidence. Every time he'd walked into that bar, his life got worse. The claim, if he walked into the coffee shop instead, maybe things could be different. The conclusion, he didn't know yet, but he could find out. Marcus stepped inside. The coffee shop was busy, but not crowded. The people working on laptops. A couple in the corner having a quiet conversation. The barista called out an order. Normal, safe, alive. Sarah walked to the counter. What do you want? Sorry about that. Hang on. Normal, safe, alive. Sarah walked to the counter. What do you want? Marcus pulled out his wallet with shaking hands. My treat, Sarah said. Seriously, what do you want? Just black coffee. Thanks. Sarah ordered a black coffee for him. Something complicated with oat milk. Oat milk? My apologies. Sorry, I just got a little emotional for a second reading there. So I'm a little bit stumbling over my words. But I hope you're enjoying the book so far. We'll go ahead and delve back into it. Sarah ordered a black coffee for him, something complicated with oat milk. For herself. She paid before Marcus could argue. They found a table by the window. Marcus sat down, gripping the edge of the table to keep his hands steady. Sarah set his coffee in front of him. Sarah sat down across from him, didn't say anything, just waited. Marcus stared at the coffee. I was going to the bar, he'd said finally. I know. I've been sober for, he stopped, counted, 3 months. Then my dad died. Then I stopped going to class. Then the house started falling apart. Then he stopped again. Then I couldn't do it anymore. Sarah nodded, took a sip of her drink. How long have you been sober? Marcus asked. 2 years. Does it get easier? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Yes and no. The shaking stops. The cravings fade. But the reason you drank in the first place, those don't go away on their own. Marcus looked at her. What were your reasons? Same as everyone's. I was trying to fix something broken by breaking myself more. She shrugged. Turns out that doesn't work. Yeah, Marcus said quietly. I figured that out too. They sat in silence for a while. Marcus picked up his coffee. His hands were shaking less now. He took a sip. It was hot, bitter, grounding. Thank you, he said, for stopping me. I didn't stop you, Sarah said. You stopped yourself. I just ordered coffee. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. Can I ask you something? Sarah said. Yeah. Why were you going to the bar? Marcus thought about the last 6 days, about the hole in the ceiling, about the beliefs he'd examined and found hollow, about the foundation he'd torn down without knowing how to rebuild. I learned how to think, he said, and it made everything worse. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Explain? I spent the last week figuring out that most of what I believe, most of what I've always believed, isn't based on anything real. Just stuff I inherited. Stuff I absorbed, stuff I never questioned. He looked at his coffee, and now I don't know what I believe anymore. And that's terrifying. Sarah nodded slowly. So you were going to the bar because thinking clearly made you realize how unclear everything was? Yeah, pretty much. And drinking would have fixed that? Marcus laughed bitterly. No, but it would have made me stop caring for a few hours. Would it, though? Marcus looked up. Sarah leaned forward slightly. I'm not trying to lecture you. I'm asking because I did the same time. Every time I figured something out, every time I realized I'd been wrong about something, I'd drink to make it stop. And you know what? It didn't stop. It just got louder. Marcus stared at her. The truth is, Sarah said, learning to think clearly is terrifying because once you see the cracks in the foundation, you can't unsee them. And it's easier to numb yourself than to do the work of rebuilding. So what do? Marcus asked. You rebuild anyway, Sarah said, one beam at a time. They talked for 2 hours, not about anything heavy. After that, they just talked. Sarah told him she was a grad student, philosophy, writing her thesis on epistemology, how we know what we know. Marcus almost laughed at that. That's what I've been reading about. Yeah? Yeah, accidentally. I was trying to find out why my life fell apart. And I ended up learning about logic and evidence and all this stuff I should have learned in school. You probably did learn it at school, Sarah said. You just weren't ready to hear it yet. Marcus thought about that. Maybe. Sarah asked about his dad. Marcus told her, not everything, but enough. The stroke, the hospital, the funeral, the house that was falling apart. I'm sorry, Sarah said, and she meant it, not the hollow I'm sorry, like people said at funerals, the kind that meant I understand what loss feels like. Thanks, Marcus said. Eventually, the coffee shop started emptying out. The sun was setting outside. Marcus hadn't noticed how much time had passed. "I should go," he said. "Yeah, me too." They stood and walked to the door together. Outside, the air was cold again, but it didn't feel as sharp. "Hey, Sarah." "Hey," Sarah said. "Do you come here often, to this coffee shop?" "I've never been here before." "Me neither, but I think I'll come back." Sarah looked at him. "Same time tomorrow?" Marcus hesitated. "Why?" "Because," Sarah said, "you just learned how to think, and thinking alone is dangerous. You need someone to argue with." Marcus almost smiled again. Argue? Debate, discuss, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I think you need someone to test your ideas against. And I could use the practice for my thesis. Marcus looked at her, at the coffee shop behind her, at the bar, still half a block away in the other direction. "Okay," he said, "same time tomorrow." "Good." Sarah pulled out her phone. "Give me your number in case one of us is late." They exchanged numbers. "See you tomorrow, Marcus." "See you tomorrow." Marcus walked home. Not to the bar. Home. The house was still broken when he got there. The hole in the ceiling, the rotting floor, the flickering breakers, but something was different. Marcus sat on the couch and pulled out his notebook. He opened to the page where he'd written to rebuild. Start with logic, the bedrock. Add evidence, the soil. Make honest claims, the beams. Reach conclusions carefully, the structure. He'd written that days ago, but he hadn't believed it would actually work. Now sitting here, after walking away from the bar, after choosing coffee over whiskey, he felt something shift. Not confidence, not certainty, just possibility. Maybe he could rebuild. Maybe he didn't have all the answers right now. Maybe he didn't have to. Maybe it was enough to take one step, then another, and then another. Marcus closed the notebook. Tomorrow he'd meet Sarah at the coffee shop, and they'd argue about ideas, test claims, follow evidence, and maybe, just maybe, he'd start to figure out what he actually believed, not what he'd inherited, not what was easy, not what numbed the pain, what was true. Marcus looked at the hole in the ceiling one more time. Then he turned off the light and went to sleep. Epilogue. 6 months later. The house still wasn't fixed. Marcus had patched the ceiling badly, but enough to stop worrying about it collapsing again. The floor in the laundry room was still soft in places. The breakers still flipped occasionally but he'd learned to live with it. And more importantly, he'd learned that a broken house didn't mean a broken life. He was back in school, had reapplied for 3 months sober. After 3 months sober, got accepted, and hadn't looked back. Software engineering. His grades were good, not perfect, but solid. He was on track to graduate next year. And he hadn't had a drink in 6 months. Not because it was easy. It wasn't. There were still nights when the hollow ache in his chest made him want to walk to the bar. Still moments when the weight of everything felt unbearable. But he'd learned something over the last 6 months. One choice at a time was enough. Coffee instead of whiskey, class instead of hiding, thinking instead of numbing. One choice at a time. Marcus walked into the coffee shop. Their coffee shop now. And Sarah already sitting at their usual table by the window. Sarah looked up and smiled. "You're late." "Traffic," Marcus lied. "You don't have a car." "Fine, I overslept." Sarah laughed. "Sit down. I want to show you something." Marcus sat. Sarah pushed a book across the table. The cover read, Does Truth Exist? An Introduction to Epistemology. Required reading for my thesis, she said, but I think you'd like it. It picks up right where your research left off. Marcus picked up the book, flipped through it. Yeah? Yeah. Chapter 1 is literally titled, The Flaw in Our Thinking. Marcus smiled, a real smile this time. I'll read it. Good, because next week we're debating it. Of course we are. Sarah leaned back, sipping her coffee. So, how's the house? Still broken. You ever gonna fix it? Marcus thought about that. Eventually. But it turns out broken houses are more honest than perfect ones. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Explain? A perfect house hides its problems. A broken house shows you exactly where the work needs to be done. Sarah smiled. I like that. Yeah, Marcus said. Me too. They talked for 2 hours, like they did every week, about truth, about logic, about the beliefs they'd inherited, the ones they'd chosen. And when Marcus walked home that night, past the bar, that was still 3 blocks away, he didn't feel the pull anymore. Not because the temptation was gone, but because he'd built something stronger. A foundation, not perfect, not finished, but solid enough to stand on, and that was enough. Until next time, test everything and hold fast to what is true. The journey continues in The Burden of Proof, A Solid Foundation, where Marcus and Sarah's debate take them deeper into the question that matters most. Does truth exist? Can we know anything for certain? And what happens when logic demands you follow the evidence, even when it leads to somewhere you never expected? So that is the end of book 1, The Flaw. If you're just catching the end of this, it's available online at burdenofproof.co. You can get the free download because that'll take you to the shop. You'll just click that little purchase button. It has a $0 price on it. But once again, the main point is that of today's lesson really is what the biggest or one of the biggest flaws really is. Because in the past episodes, I've talked about inherited beliefs, things that we just assumed to be true based on the fact that those around us believed in those things or taught them to us. And not all of them are necessarily wrong. But at the same time, when we get old enough to recognize that they could be, the only rational choice is to start to test them. And if when they come in contact with reality, they don't hold up, then the only rational choice is to discard them and find out what's true. If anything is true, if anything is rational, if discarding something is even possible. You see how many claims are built in, how many definitions are assumed? And this is where most of the conversations with other people go wrong. Is we're not even talking about the same thing in the first place, and we don't even realize it. And we haven't even confirmed that an answer can be actually found. And when you think about it that way, I'm not sure how productive it can actually be. Yeah, you might have got to some truth, if the truth exists, but you really just stumbled into it. Maybe you made an educated guess, but is it actually educated? Well, it's really only educated if you understood by implicity. Implicity meaning things that actually exist for sure, and that by some unconscious rationality you already know it to be true because of what you see in reality, but you can't figure out why. But that still doesn't count for evidence. And you may know, but as we've pointed out here, that type of knowing is just a claim built on a foundation that you haven't proven, that you haven't earned. And that's why the whole tagline of this podcast, the whole tagline of this book series, at this point, the whole tagline of my entire life. And it probably will become the tagline for anyone who really desires clarity and truth, is test everything. Test everything, hold fast to what is true. And so I want to thank y'all. Those of you who have already watched some of my content, those of you who may be watching now, and those of you who may watch in the future. I want to thank y'all for taking the time to listen to what I have to say on the matter, and I really want to encourage you to stick around, because all we've done so far is point out the flaw. And the biggest, or one of the biggest of those flaws, the one that underlies them all, is claiming that you know something based on the evidence, but that you can't actually know anything for certain because you've disproved your own evidence. And next week, starting on Sunday, we will begin to examine the method that has been in development for quite some time now, and we're going to do exactly what I've been talking about since this podcast began. We're going to test everything. And if we can find truth, I for one intend to hold fast to it. So once again, thanks for joining me, and I hope you will be here for tomorrow's episode.